All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're talking about a monarch who completely rewrote the rulebook for power in England. I'm talking about Mary I, the country's first ever queen to rule with her own authority. But here's the thing, her legacy is, well, it's complicated. You've probably heard her infamous nickname, Bloody Mary. So the big question is, how on earth did the very first woman to wear the English crown end up with a reputation that scary? Let's figure it out. You see, to really get who the queen was, we have to start with who she was as a girl. And her path to the throne was anything but a straight line. Seriously, it was a total roller coaster of power, faith, and just trying to survive. So, Mary Tudor was born in 1516. She's the treasured daughter of the famous King Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. For all intents and purposes, she was the future of England. And then everything just fell apart. In 1533, her father divorced her mother so he could marry Anne Boleyn. And just like that, Mary was declared illegitimate, her title ripped away. She was basically a nobody. It took over 10 years before she was finally put back in the line of succession. Can you just imagine living with that kind of uncertainty? Through all of that chaos, there was one thing about Mary that never, ever changed: her deep Catholic faith. See, when Henry couldn't get the Pope to annul his marriage, he just broke away from the Catholic Church entirely and started his own, the Church of England. But Mary, she refused to accept her father as the head of this new church, and that put her in direct and very dangerous conflict with the most powerful man in the country, who also happened to be her dad. And that toughness, that resilience she had to learn as a teenager, well, it was about to be put to the ultimate test. Because when her younger half-brother, King Edward VI, died, the throne that should have been hers was suddenly at risk of being stolen right out from under her. Edward was a really committed Protestant, and his biggest fear was Mary taking over and making England Catholic again. So he tried to write her out of his will. A group of powerful lords saw their chance and put a young noblewoman, Lady Jane Grey, on the throne instead. It was a huge political power play. But Mary was not about to be pushed aside, not after everything she'd been through. She gathered an army of supporters, people who believed she was the true rightful heir. The public was on her side, and she marched into London as a hero. Lady Jane Grey's reign, it was over in just 9 days. And this moment was absolutely massive for history. When Mary was crowned, she became England's first ever queen regnant. Now, what does that mean? It means she was a queen who ruled all by herself, in her own right, not just because she was a king's wife. This had never happened before. She proved for the very first time that a woman could hold the highest power in the land. So, she's finally on the throne, and she has one single, all-consuming goal, a mission she truly believed God had given her: to turn back the clock on the Protestant Reformation and return England to the Catholic Church. And she didn't waste any time. First, she got Parliament to start canceling all the Protestant laws her father and brother had created. Next, she brought England back under the authority of the Pope. Traditional Latin church services and ceremonies were back. But the last step was the most important. She had to secure a Catholic future. And to do that, she needed a Catholic heir. This led to her marriage to Prince Philip of Spain, a decision that was incredibly unpopular. A lot of English people were terrified that their country was about to be taken over by Spain. In her mind, Mary was doing God's work, saving the souls of her people. But the way she chose to enforce her religious vision, well, that's what would define her reign forever and give her that notorious nickname. Over her 5-year reign, nearly 300 Protestants were executed for refusing to give up their faith. And the method of execution was one of the most horrifying things you can imagine: being burned alive at the stake. This wasn't just a few high-profile leaders. It was men, women, priests, and just ordinary people. So how could she legally do this? The charge was heresy. A heretic is basically anyone whose personal beliefs go against the official teachings of the church. Mary brought back old laws that made heresy a crime you could be put to death for, and she used those laws to try and wipe out Protestantism completely. But here's the thing about these very public, very brutal executions: they often had the exact opposite effect she wanted. They turned victims into martyrs. This powerful quote comes from a Protestant bishop, Hugh Latimer, who said it to his friend as they were both about to be executed. Instead of terrifying people into converting back to Catholicism, the courage of people like him often just made the Protestant cause stronger.
Now, while all this religious conflict was happening, the rest of the kingdom was facing a whole host of other massive problems. For the average person in England, life during Mary's reign was just plain hard. England was getting hammered by terrible weather, which led to failed harvests year after year. That meant there wasn't enough food, and famine was a real problem. On top of that, a deadly strain of flu was sweeping through the country, killing thousands. And to make it all worse, the price of basic things, like bread, was just going through the roof. It was a really grim time for a lot of people.
And then, to cap it all off, came a crushing military defeat. In 1558, Mary's marriage to Philip of Spain dragged England into a war with France. And in that war, England lost the city of Calais. This was a huge deal. Calais had been English for over 200 years. Losing it felt like a total national humiliation. And for many, it was the final proof that her reign was a failure. So you have religious persecution at home, military failure abroad. Mary's final years were not happy ones. And all of this brings us to the really complex question of how we should look back on her today. Mary died when she was only 42. She had suffered through several phantom pregnancies, which was heartbreaking for her, and she never had the Catholic heir she so desperately wanted. In the end, she died knowing that her Protestant half-sister, Elizabeth, was next in line for the throne, and that Elizabeth would probably undo everything she had fought and killed for. It's a pretty tragic end to her life's work. And this really gets to the two sides of her story. On the one hand, you've got the tyrant, Bloody Mary, the religious extremist who burned hundreds of people and lost that key territory of Calais. But on the other hand, you have the pioneer. She was England's first queen regnant, a trailblazer who proved a woman could actually rule the country. And she even made some really important reforms to the Navy and the tax system that her successors built on. Both of these stories are true. So what's the final verdict? Was she a cruel tyrant, completely blinded by her faith? Or was she a misunderstood pioneer, a tough woman facing challenges that no man had ever faced before? Her story really forces you to look past that simple, scary nickname and see the complicated, groundbreaking, and ultimately tragic person who was England's very first queen.